Hello, everyone. Coming in on Zoom, I am Henry Crawford, and welcome to the June 2022 edition of Poets versus the Pandemic. This is the final program in our poetry series, which has provided a reading space for poets with new books that have come out during the pandemic. Tonight, we are featuring poet Sue Ellen Thompson, who will be reading from her new book, Sea Nettles, along with guest poets Fran Abrams and Aaron Kaseko Kimura. With me tonight as co-host is WordWorks founder Karen Alanier. I want to thank everyone for coming in tonight and for your support of our poetry program. Some of you have been with us since our first program, which featured David Keplinger back in April 25, 2020. Since then, we've brought many poets to the Zoom screen and featured many books that would have had no live forum. But now it is June 2022. And we pray that the devastation brought about by COVID-19 is, for the most part, in the past. To the poets in our community, let me say, we have stayed together and we are healing. I want to thank the WordWorks for their help in making these programs possible, and particularly Karen Alanier, who's been my co-host and partner in all of them. Without Karen's enormous insight, energy, and direction, none of this would have been possible. So let's get started. First, and most importantly, we want you to purchase the poet's book. So I'll put a link from time to time into the chat that will take you to the places where you can purchase the books of each of our poets tonight. We also have a donation button on that page, so don't feel shy about donating to our program. We at WordWorks and Cafe Muse will thank you wholeheartedly. I'm also going to put into the chat a link from time to time where you can follow all of our WordWorks online readings, sign up on the registration form, and you'll be on our mailing list to get Zoom links for the readings. Now, if you want to ask a question of our poets, please feel free to drop a question into the chat, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we have time. A couple more things. Please join us on Monday, July 11, 2022, when Cafe Muse Online will present poets Kelly Crescio Moeller and Abby Wender. So it is a very special pleasure that I have tonight introducing Sue Ellen Thompson. She is a premier figure in poetry at both the local and national levels. She is a paragon of the craft of poetry. Sue Ellen's poems are smart and thought-provoking, with enough emotional depth to beckon the reader to keep coming back, lest some nuance of meaning be missed. Sue Ellen Thompson's poems have been read on National Public Radio by Garrison Keillor, have been featured in the U.S. Poet Laureate Ted Cruz's nationally syndicated newspaper column, and have received numerous awards, including the 1986 Samuel French Morse Prize, the 2003 Pablo Neruda Prize, and 2 individual artist grants from the state of Connecticut. She's the author of 6 books, most recently Sea Nettles, New and Selected Poems, which we'll hear probably from tonight, the book They, and The Golden Hour, which was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. She's also the editor of the Autumn House Anthology of Contemporary American Poetry, a selection from the work of 94 American poets that is now being used in college classrooms across the country. And speaking of classrooms, I should not let this introduction go by without mentioning Sue Ellen's contribution as a teacher and workshop leader at the Writers Center. She was one of my most influential teachers when I started writing poems, and I am proud to say that I have a folder full of notes from her classes. So without any further ado, let's put our Zoom hands together for Sue Ellen Thompson. Go for it.
Okay. As Henry said, tonight we're supposed to hold our books up. So there it is. I will be reading from Sea Nettles, New and Selected Poems. Now, like all poets, when I sat down to put this book together, I gave a lot of thought to what the first poem in the book would be. And the one that I chose wasn't one that had been published, either in print or online. In fact, it had been rejected several times, but it still expressed something I've thought about a lot as I've gotten older, which is how little I knew as a young woman, say just graduating from college, what my life's challenges would be. And in fact, very few of us, I think, end up leading the kind of lives we expected we would lead. But since so many of my poems deal with events and situations that I never anticipated, I thought this would be a good introductory poem for the book. The Universe. On the one whose family adores her, children and grandchildren, the universe bestows an incurable illness. On the one who has been healthy all her life, the universe inflicts a financial crisis. For the one who has always been well-to-do, the universe chooses not one unfaithful husband, but two. To the one whose marriage has been long and happy, the universe grants a single child estranged from his parents. What does the successful mother have to lose? The universe thinks a premature death might do. So do not bask in gratitude or relief over what you have avoided or achieved. It is not toward the expected that the universe inclines. For you, the universe has something else in mind. Well, what the universe had in mind for me, apparently, was to give birth to a transgender child, although I didn't know it for 26 years. I'll read, just by way of background, I'll read one of the poems from the latter half of the book, which consists of selections from my two more recent books. A Comfort. When she turned 6 and wouldn't wear a dress to her own party, the other mothers smiled knowingly and said, she'll come around. When she was 10 and threw away the Valentine a boy had sent, my mother said, she's only 10, she'll come around. At 12, she wore her father's flannel shirts to school. They call it grunge, her teacher said. She'll come around when she's a little older. In high school, there were other girls who spiked their hair and dyed it dark magenta, but only mine wore underwear designed for men beneath her low-slung cargo pants. Waiting outside the school one day, I heard another mother say, I know my daughter won't look like this forever. When she goes to college, she'll come around. Then she added, with some embarrassment, so will yours. I shook my head. My daughter had worn camouflage to nursery school. She came home from college with piercings in her cartilage. Stop worrying, my husband said. She'll come around when she has to get a job. I knew that would make no difference. She found a place that hired her just as she was. She'll meet a guy and that will be the end of it. More than a few friends told me this. You don't know my daughter, I said. But cradling myself in bed, I thought, she'll come around. I lived most of my adult life in Mystic, Connecticut, home to, as some of you might know, the famous Mystic Seaport Museum, where my husband worked for many years. And our first boat was built by the small craft shop at the museum. And one of the boat builders was a woman who made us a very special tiller. But that's only a metaphor, really, for what this poem is really about. Genderqueer. Lapstrake, sprit-rigged. Our first boat had 2 sets of oarlocks and a hole in the forward thwart for a spar. Enough room for the 3 of us then, with my outstretched leg as a whisker pole, and astride the mast our 12-year-old, already at play with her balance. The boat, which we soon outgrew, made its way back to the woman who built it. But that child who left home at 22 never returned as the child we knew. We kept the tiller, carved to resemble a woman's leg, not to remind us of what we thought she'd be, but of the versatile, small-boned craft in which, had we seen a storm coming and dropped the mast, we might have rowed safely home. I grew up in a big family. I was number 2 of 5 children, all born within a 10-year span. And this is a Shakespearean sonnet, really, about my childhood. And it will serve as a kind of bridge to a couple of other poems on that same subject. 5 kids. My mother claimed she could tell us apart by the sound of our peeing. Lying in bed, she knew my older sister's bossy gush, the spurts of impatience from my younger sister, the altitude-induced tonal differences of the 2 boys. She said my pee was tentative and ladylike, something I enjoyed hearing because I was neither. If I was sick in the middle of the night and cried out, "Mom," at the crescendo of my retching, something I still do in my head, she'd be at my side already with her "I'm here, honey," and the right toothbrush. As for my only child, my daughter, I think I don't know half as much about her. So I grew up in a small town in New Jersey in a house surrounded by woods. And piece by piece, the woods were sold off as building lots. But my parents hung on to one of them so that we kids would have a place to play. This is another rhyming poem in which I tried to recapture some of the innocence of those days. Fernwood. Dispatching the dead mandevilla leaves with pendulum swings of my broom, I am back on the paths of the wooded lot next to my childhood home. A third of an acre at most, it had trees that cast a terrarium's jade over the warren of rooms ringed with stones where we squandered our summer days. Connected by corridors paved with dirt packed so hard it had the dull sheen of wood, these chambers of wavering light were the home of the house of our dreams. My sisters and I swept them clean every day. The minute a leaf drifted down, we leapt upon it with rakes and brooms, leaving only the bare polished ground. Day after day, we swept the earth, perfecting our shared domicile. For whom? Our only visitors were the cats who made it feel wild. Our rage for order had less to do with the home in which we'd been raised than with our unconscious, unspoken wish that our world continue unchanged. What could go wrong here? Nothing, we thought, but something disturbed that great calm. Those summers, the side woods, our parents, the cats, every one of them gone. My dad was a B-24 pilot in World War II. He was shot down over northern Italy in 1943 and spent the first 2.5 years of his marriage to my mother as a POW in Germany. And I think I was well into my 40s before I ever asked him a single question about that experience. And I never stopped to think of how recent that experience was when we were young and growing up. I mean, he hadn't been home from the war all that long. Sharkey's Dump, 1958. On the way home from Sunday school, our father veered off on a dirt road, ending at a dump where wild pigs could be seen rooting through the garbage. The swamp surrounding it had grown a greenish skin, and our mother, who believed in God but would not trade a morning alone in the house for anything, had given us her old chip dinner plates to skim across it. Not far away, the local airstrip ended in an archipelago of concrete. Distant Piper Cubs and Cessna Bobcats idled lazily until, like greenhead flies inspired by the scent of horses, they suddenly accelerated toward us. Our father, still in his 30s, lay across the open tailgate of the station wagon, smoking Winstons as the plane's low bellies rolled over him. This was where we wanted to be on a Sunday morning, flying our plates out over the swamp's unbroken green, terrorizing the local pigs, while our father, who hadn't flown a plane since the war ended and he'd returned from prison camp, ethereally thin, watched a younger man, winged and unencumbered, fade into smoke and silence. So fast forward, I guess it would be about 70 years. And my father is now 91, was 91, had been a widower for 10 years, living alone in a New Hampshire farmhouse, but still unable to forget that World War II experience. The last time I saw my father, he couldn't sleep, couldn't get comfortable in the hospital bed we brought into his room, would push a button and his feet would rise up to the ceiling. He had no appetite, he was thirsty, but drinking only made him want to pee, and he couldn't do that either. In the middle of the night, I found him sitting with his thin legs dangling off the bed, pajama bottoms halfway to his knees, one hand holding what I did not want to see, the plastic urinal tipped over on the table, out of reach. With sudden clarity, he looked at me and asked, "Are we drilling today?" I thought he might be dreaming about the VA dental clinic, where he had endured 6 decades of extractions, root canals, and a series of bridges that never seemed to work or fit. The legacy of his stay in a German POW camp. But then I realized it was 1943, and he was back in Lubbock, Texas, in the Army Air Corps. "No drills today," I told him, and this seemed to comfort him. "Good," he said, and then, "I'm tired," closing his eyes as if he knew that nothing further would be required.
Fran Abrams has published poetry online and in print in Cathexis Northwest Press, the American Journal of Poetry, McQueen's Quinterly Literary Magazine, The Raven's Perch, Gargoyle 74, and others. In 2019, she was a juried poet at the Houston, Texas Poetry Fest. Her poems appear in more than a dozen anthologies, including the 2021 collection titled This Is What America Looks Like from the Washington Writers Publishing House. In December of 2021, she won the Washington Writers Publishing House Winter Poetry Prize for her poem entitled Waiting for Snow. Her first chapbook, titled The Poet Who Loves Pythagoras, is forthcoming from Finishing Line Press. Not long ago, I remember Fran sitting in our Cafe Muse audience and coming up to the open mic. Over the next few years, I've watched her become a well-published and prize-winning poet. Fran is a veteran of Poets versus the Pandemic with an appearance as part of the This Is What America Looks Like anthology. Her poems are wise and thoughtful, and I know that we're all awaiting her forthcoming book. So let's put our Zoom hands together for this Pythagoras-loving Fran Abrams.
Thank you so much, Henry, for that introduction. And thank you to everyone for being here. My deepest gratitude to WordWorks for including me in this program. It's a joy and an honor to read alongside these two esteemed poets. And I too have been a student of Sue Ellen's and deeply appreciate all I learned from her. The first poem I'm going to read is about writing poems. Somehow that seems a good place to start. It's called Arranging Words. What is the value of hours spent coddling words, coaxing them into proper order? Would I do better to practice sewing, connecting seams of blouses and slacks? Tell me you find solace when you slip into a poem. Find joy as you button a poem around you. Then I will continue to favor my pen over my needle and thread. The next poem I'm going to read was written in September 2020 about the pandemic, but somehow it still feels current. It's called Speaking with Strangers While Shopping. They still don't have paper towels here. Even Costco was rationing them, 2 to a customer. I just want my olives, healthy, you know. Haven't been able to find half the things on my list. There are fires on the West Coast. I expect I won't find the greens I usually buy. Wonder how long we'll get oranges from Florida. The floods from the hurricanes have been horrible. The best time to go shopping is in the morning, when you can still get ahead of the crowds. Have you looked at the masks some people are wearing? My favorites are the ones with kittens and puppies. I get so upset with people pushing ahead of me. I'm sure I need eggs as much as they do. Does it feel like a third world country to you? I mean, walking into the store and finding the shelves half empty. The next poem is based on my childhood that I often find myself mining memories to find poems. In this case, the title is also the first line. Silver soup spoon, no longer shiny, left in the kitchen drawer for many years. The tool I chose when playing archaeologist. I dug for hours in the dirt, searching for evidence of early life, looking for ancient bones near roots of elm trees planted at the curb in our suburban subdivision built in 1954. Indoors, I opened my encyclopedia, read about what I might find. Perhaps not bones, but signs of early settlers, a button, a shard of clay. All I found were stones that I washed with a garden hose, brought inside for my mother to admire. My silver spoon, a search engine, long before that phrase was invented. The next poem is titled The Price of Ignorance. The prompt for this poem came from Eve Burton, who runs a program called Quince Orchard Poetry Evenings, sponsored by the Quince Orchard Library in Gaithersburg. So a shout out to Eve. The price of ignorance is paid in a currency of knots, paid with lives of people who chose not to wear seatbelts, decided not to get vaccinated, thought smoking was not harmful. People who did not lock guns away, who drank until their livers did not work, who drove as if speed limits were not needed. People who did not appreciate that the same hearts beat in all our chests when they fired a weapon into someone else's. The next poem is titled Mailbox, and this one resulted from a prompt in a class taught by Ann Quinn. I can't say often enough how much I appreciate all the opportunities to learn the craft of poetry that are available in these year parts. I started writing poetry in 2017, and it never would have happened were it not for the excellent instructors, including Ann Quinn and Sue Ellen, that I've had a chance to work with them, many through the Writers Center in Bethesda. So again, this poem is called Mailbox. Evergreens mark the corner of our lot, 3 bushes planted just before we moved in, now intertwined into one unkempt, prickly form. Gray driveway defines the property line and gives access to the neighbor's house. Where his driveway meets the street, bright blue mailbox sits on top of brick column. Swale separates evergreens from street, delineating the public right-of-way. Wide round pipe disappears under the driveway to carry away rainwater. Grass is green today, responding to soaking rains. Spring will go out like a lamb in late March, and evergreens will show new spurts of green at the tips of branches, like a woman showing off nail polish. When rains pass, gray pavement will bounce sun like reflections from shiny new boots. Owner of blue mailbox will add another coat of paint, as he does each spring, as if by doing so, only good news will be delivered. The next poem came to me in a dream. It's called A Dream State. I was driving a deserted road. Trees leaned over both sides of the pavement. Daylight was fading. I needed a place to sleep. I was asleep dreaming this road, and a building appeared. A dimly lit sign read, Percy's Rest and Restaurant, rooms for rent. I pulled onto the gravel lot in Made for the Movies gloom, walked inside, inquired about a room for the night, asked what town I was in. I don't recall the transaction or bringing my bag inside. I remember a small room with old-fashioned furniture, a bed with a soft comforter. I sat on the bed, texted my daughter to tell her where I was. I was asleep in my dream when she texted back to say she could find no such town and no evidence Percy's Rest and Restaurant existed. The next poem I'm going to read is not a dream. It's based on an actual event, only the names have been changed. It's titled, No One Wanted to Get Involved. I turn onto Schooner's Drive. A few blocks in, I see black smoke billowing across the road, not down low where it might impede traffic, but high like a black cloud, hoping no one will notice. And it looks like no one does. Drivers hasten past the fire that's burning, junk cars at a scrap metal yard, flames easy to see, yet no fire trucks have arrived, no sound of approaching sirens. It looks like no one has reported the blaze. There's no place to pull over. I keep driving while I call 911 on my hands-free phone, feel less than helpful when I cannot tell the dispatcher the exact address I have driven past. Just turn onto Schooner's Drive from Norton Boulevard, I say. The smoke is easy to see. I don't understand why no one else has called it in, why no one else can see 100 car bodies burning by the side of a busy road. Next, I'm going to read 3 poems from my chapbook. As Henry mentioned, it will be available in March next year from Finishing Line Press. The book is titled The Poet Who Loves Pythagoras, and it looks at math and science subjects from a poetic and somewhat lighthearted viewpoint. Sandra Beasley, who kindly wrote a blurb for this book, says, quote, equal parts clever and vulnerable, the poet who loves Pythagoras wields the vocabulary of mathematics and science like a blade. If you're not already on my newsletter mailing list, I hope you'll go to my website. Henry has provided the link, and sign up for the newsletter so you'll get notice when the book is available. Here is the title poem, Pythagorean Theorem. Few things in life are certain. A firm red apple may hide a worm. A storm may intrude on a sunny day. That is why I love Pythagoras. that ancient Greek who gave us the Pythagorean theorem, an equation so reliable it has been proven hundreds of times throughout history. Pythagoras was the first man to call himself a philosopher, a lover of wisdom. Though I love him, I am no less certain of his philosophy than of his math. He believed that every soul is immortal, and upon death enters a new body. He traveled throughout ancient Greece and Egypt to proselytize his religious philosophy. I choose to love Pythagoras, the mathematician, the one who taught us that in a right triangle, where A and B are the measures of the triangle's sides, and C is the hypotenuse, A squared plus B squared always equals C squared. Even the word hypotenuse gives me chills. The next poem, also from this collection, is titled Celsius versus Fahrenheit. We take you now to this evening's debate between Celsius, who prefers to be known as Cel, and Fahrenheit. Her friends call her Fair. The two are the most common measures of temperature, but they agree on very little. On the hot side of the debate, Cel says water boils at 100 degrees, while friends of Fair know that water boils at precisely 212 degrees. On the cold side, it is evident water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius, but won't freeze until it reaches 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And to make our competition even more contentious, Cel and Fair use different size degrees. When Cel stands up to argue, he surely will remind you that 1 degree Celsius is 1.8 times the size of 1 degree Fahrenheit. Fair may ask you to remember that at minus 40 degrees, they're both the same. Oh, sure, there's a convenient formula to allow conversion from one to the other, but neither one is likely to agree to convert. The next poem is also from my chapbook. It's titled Newton's Third Law. And by the way, again, please visit my website. The poems that are online, and these 3 poems are already published online, you can click on them and read them again. Newton's third law. For every force, there is an equal and opposite force. Hit your elbow on a car door, and the force of your elbow is returned by the door with an equal force of its own. No one needs to explain the law that makes it so. Your elbow aches regardless. The law expresses a symmetry found in nature. Forces always occur in pairs, and one body cannot exert a force on another without experiencing a force itself. It's unfortunate the third law does not apply to wars. If it did, force used against another nation would return as force experienced. Better to pound on the negotiating table. It makes only noise when it pushes back. And the last poem I'm going to read, I wrote this afternoon. I don't usually read raw poems, but I'll probably make some changes. But this poem is based on yesterday's January 6th committee hearing. And I honestly just felt compelled to write a poem about ketchup. This is called A Fight for the Title. The nation's formerly worst president is named Richard Nixon, a man whose shenanigans with telephone recordings and break-ins went down in history, a man who declared he was not a crook and then proved he was. But no one ever reported him throwing his food at the wall. Now we have a new worst president, a man who insists he won re-election when the numbers said he lost, who worked to thwart the orderly transition to a new president, something no other president has ever done. A man who threw his lunch at the wall in the Oval Office dining room when he learned his own attorney general said he did not win. Ketchup dripping down the wall has now become the standard by which the next worst president will be judged. Thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you, Fran. And so now let's turn to Aaron Kasego Kimura. Aaron is a writer and visual artist. He is the author of 2 poetry collections, Ubasute, which won the 2020 Slappering Hall Press chapbook competition, and his full-length collection, Common Grace, to be published by Beacon Press in the fall of 2022. His honors include a Robert Pinsky Global Fellowship in Poetry and a Best New Poets anthology nomination. His poems have appeared in a number of places, including Rhino, Upstreet, Poet Lore, and several others. If you were lucky enough to see our April program, you know how good Aaron is at crafting subtle and yet tremendously moving poems. So good, in fact, that we asked him to come back and give us some more of his poetic magic. So let's bring Aaron Kasego Kimura up to the PvP Zoom stage with a warm Zoom welcome.
Hello, everyone. Henry, thank you so much. Karen, thank you. Thank you for having me back. It's good to be back. It's good to be here. Thank you, everyone, for coming out to hear us all read tonight. And Fran and Sue Ellen, thank you so much for your wonderful poems and your wonderful readings. It's an honor to be here tonight reading with you. I'm going to read 10 poems for you tonight from my chapbook, Ubasute. This chapbook is about my parents, and it touches off on their experiences of World War II, of being newlyweds, of being parents, of settling in suburbia, Northern California, suburbia, and mostly it's about them growing old and dying. The title Ubasute is a Japanese word which literally means abandoned, and it refers to this mythical practice from Japanese folklore where a grown son lifts his aged mother on his back, carries her to a mountain, and abandons her, leaves her there to die. I was a little boy when my mother told me this horrible tale. Don't tell your kids these things. And this is the subject matter of the first poem I'm going to read for you. It's the first poem of the book. And it's an ekphrastic poem. And it was inspired by a woodblock print by the master Tsukioka Yoshitoshi. And that's the woodblock print. And you could see right here in the corner, the son with the mother on his back, and he's carrying her up the mountain. And the title of the woodblock print and the title of my poem is The Moon of Ubasute. The Moon of Ubasute, after the woodblock by Tsukioka Yoshitoshi. Years from now, when I am old, blind, and crippled, his mother said, you must carry me up the slope of Tanigawa, past the ancient knotted pine, leave me in a cradle of hakone grass and moss. Without pity, my son, the moon will watch as I reach for my mother, Okasan, Okasan. The ginkgos will bow, weep their leaves, bury me in gold. My next poem is a pantoum, and it's entitled Burial. I returned my father's body to the earth, cremated as he instructed in a letter. No funeral, no obituary in the newspaper. Those who needed to know were told. I had his remains cremated as he instructed, scattered his ashes in Bodega Bay. Those who needed to know were told that I waited until my mother passed to scatter his ashes in Bodega Bay, past the jetty where we used to fish. I waited until my mother passed, poured out their dust together, past the jetty where we used to fish, from the deck of the Miss Anita, seagulls calling overhead. I poured out their dust together with a handful of Uncle George, from the deck of the Miss Anita, seagulls calling overhead. No funeral, no obituary in the newspaper. With the handful of Uncle George, I returned their bodies to the earth. In my next poem, I mention Executive Order 9066, and many of you probably already know that's the executive order that Franklin Roosevelt signed into action, which led the way to the incarceration of many Japanese Americans during World War II here in this country. I think I'll also mention that in this poem, I use a word that I didn't know before I wrote this poem. It's the word gnomon. It's spelled Gnomon. I'm sure you all know what a sundial is. Many people have these decorative sundials in their gardens. Well, the gnomon is that needle that stands upright on the gnomon, on the sundial. So when the sun crosses the sky, it casts a shadow off the needle, and you could tell time, apparently. This poem is called Hand Telling. He chuffs his shovel into soil with the sole of his right boot, more dried mud than leather. He balances full weight, both feet on the shoulders of the shovel. Gloved hands rocking the handle, blade prying packed clay. He levers a clod, turns it, hacks it, repeats down an 8-foot row to his right. The smell of earth takes him back to San Gabriel, the family farm of rented acreage, before the war, before Executive Order 9066. Eviction, incarceration. After tilling 4 beds, he plants the shovel upright like a gnomon, marking time, rests on the pine bench under the pin oak. He takes a swig from a can of Coors, surveys his garden, never needs to look beyond his fence. My next poem is about my parents when they first got married, before my sister and I came along. And this poem is entitled The Hardest Part. The fire truck siren downstairs raided the air of my mother's dreams. She'd scream in her sleep, my father told me, even after we married. More than a decade past the Second World War, for him, American concentration camps, for her, the firebombing of Tokyo. They moved into a San Francisco apartment that rented to Japs, a 1-bedroom walk-up above the Post Street fire station. They painted their bathroom black. It wasn't style then. Shelved books, unboxed a new rice cooker, watered a shrub of Japanese maple potted for their future garden. When the station got a call in the middle of the night, the rumble of the overhead door crumbled into the wreck that was once her home. Swirling lights flashed ancient trees into flames through the thin silk curtains of her eyelids. No warning, no drill, no cover. My father stilled her body, his broad hand on her shoulder or hip as they lay in the dark, listening to the slowing of her breath. The hardest part of those nights, he said, was waiting, sometimes hours, for the truck and the men to come back. The very last word of my next poem is the word two, and that's the number two, TWO. And this poem is entitled When You're the Sun, and that's SON, sun. When you're the sun, it doesn't matter if you're the youngest. Call the hospice nurse to the house to pronounce your father dead. Close the bedroom door. Give your mother the privacy she needs to tell him he left too soon. When the nurse phones the funeral home, ask your sister to take your mother to his garden to grieve with the ginkgo, pine, and pin oak. Don't let her see the dark-suited men, the gurney, the body bag. Try not to feel bad that your father's wearing only a diaper. As he's wheeled out his front door, loaded into the back of a hearse, don't think about the neighbors watching. Keep moving. Break down the hospital bed, the one delivered this morning, so your mother won't have to smell it. Finally, forgive yourself for lifting him into that bed, crushing his lungs, ending him an hour sooner, maybe two. What's kept alive? She crunches her walker into the sea of pebbles surrounding the stepping stones, tells me, this bush with flowers is Japanese. That one is too, but different. I hover close behind, ready with an outstretched arm, as if to give a blessing. Pick that large weed near the lantern, by the roots, and throw it into the pail. My father planned and planted this garden 50 years ago, hidden behind the fence of their Santa Rosa tract home. But he's gone now. She hires a hand to rake leaves, prune branches once a month. Soon she'll be gone. I'll sell the house, return to Connecticut. A stranger will buy it, become caretaker of the garden, but won't know that from their San Francisco apartment, my father transported the Japanese maple cradled in a small clay pot, the momiji now guarding the north corner, and that my mother chided him for bothering with a dying shrub. The title of my next poem is my mother's name. Her name was Hama. It's a Japanese name, and it's spelled just as it sounds, H-A-M-A. Hama. I ease a pen into the curl of mom's hand, ask her to sign a check. She sits on the edge of her bed, barely lucid, slowly forms H, A, a faint blue ballpoint cursive, a ripple, an echo. H, A, again, her hand can't write what comes next. Her name is Japanese for beach. I say, it's okay. Help her lie back. Wonder, as her eyes close, if her memory washes ashore somewhere. Goat Rock, Doran Park, bright and blustery, where with bare feet, pant legs rolled up, she watches I don't toddle too far into the surf. I have 3 more poems I'd like to read for you, and the next one is about my father, and it's entitled Memorial. Straight as steel, hands on hips, Dad balances like a hood ornament on Irving Wasserman's head. Irv stands feet shoulder width apart, arms stretched out wide. A towel turban cushions his scalp. On the San Francisco Marina Green, sunbathers pay no attention to the 2 college gymnasts in tight swim trunks. The black and white image is attached to an email Irv sent this morning. He says he lost contact after my parents married 60 years ago, would like to reconnect. He doesn't know he's 7 years too late. No online obit, found me through my website. He calls my father remarkable, a word I never heard used to describe him. But yes, look, there he is, poised in the air, the husband who never cheated, the father who never struck me. My next poem is entitled Owl. Morning ghost, white, burnt umber. I heard your hoot in my sleep. You sweep across the road, talon a vole at the oak's foot. Night eyes stare back. Bronze beak tears open the dawn. Caught in sunrise, you dissolve into shadow. I walk the long driveway from the mailbox, riffle through yesterday's junk, open a Land's End catalog. There's my mother's white wool sweater. She gets more mail than I do, though she's never lived here and is long gone. Thank you, everybody, for coming out to hear us tonight. Thank you once again, Henry and Karen and Fran and Sue Ellen. My last poem, the title of this poem is Afternoon Infusion. She panics 3 hellos as if startled by the noise of an empty house. Calls from St. Joseph's. The nurses are slow to start her hydration. I'm at a bar. Stevie Nicks reverbs in my beer, lures me back to the edge of 17 in this town I left 30 years ago. I take her call outside, stand away from the smokers. Half truth, I'm at the mall. She slurs a request. Milk of magnesia. And that other thing she can't remember. But I remember when I was a boy, she told me about the mythical Japanese custom Ubasute. A grown son lifts his aged mother on his back, delivers her to a mountain, leaves her to die. I'll come pick you up after chemo, I say, and hang up, realizing she's already cradled by the mountain. The waft of cigarette smoke and hint of manure in Santa Rosa air usher me back into the restaurant. The hostess smiles, welcomes me. Clueless, I have come and gone. Thank you.
What a terrific night of poetry. I hope you enjoyed these readers as much as I did, and I hope that you will extend your enjoyment to purchasing books and letting them others know about our series. And I will put those books back into the chat again, as I have during the evening. Please come out on Monday, July 11th, 2022, when Cafe Muse Online will present Kelly Crescio Moeller and Abby Wender. It has been a wonderful run here on Poets versus the Pandemic. And now, for the last time, let me say good night and stay safe. Thank you all.